Hi. Many people look at the Pentateuch, that is the 5 books of Moses, and they see a whole slew of horrible commandments, including genocide and capital punishment for a variety of victimless crimes like Sabbath desecration, fornication, homosexuality, etc. And they conclude that the Hebrew Bible is a barbarous relic that they can just ignore on that basis. I think that's a profound mistake, and I'm going to explain why. The first thing to understand is the historical context in which the 5 books were given. The consensus among secular scholars is that it was finalized, the version that we study today was finalized at approximately 600 BCE. There's no exact date. However, the 5 books incorporate stories, legends, myths, folklore, dating back hundreds of years. So you're really dealing with a text that was written, or at least conceptualized, from the late Bronze Age into the end of the Iron Age, essentially. Now, when Moses received the 10 Commandments and the remainder of the Torah on Mount Sinai, God could have, if he wanted to, have filled Moses in on quantum mechanics, string theory, dark matter, and so on. But God didn't. And the reason is, that's for us to find out. We're a truth-seeking species, and we have the responsibility to get to the truth on our own, so we can be proud of it, so we can have something to do instead of just sitting around and getting fat. And the same principle applies to the moral law. Given that this was a very early point in mankind's development, it could not be expected that the Israelites would have a 21st century morality. And so God worked with them where they were and said, I'm going to give you this, and I'm going to give you principles that will enable you to make steady moral progress on your own. And these include a love of controversy, a willingness to tolerate dissenting opinions, pluralism, disagreement, and so on. And through this, you will get closer and closer to the truth. And we see this happening even in the text of the Pentateuch itself. If you look at the law code that was given in Exodus, it varies quite dramatically from the law code given in Deuteronomy. Now, according to the biblical narrative, Exodus was the period after which the Israelites had escaped 430 years, according to the Bible, of brutal slavery in Egypt. This was not the environment that you could expect to produce an elevated moral consciousness, and it didn't. And so God gave them a very simple moral paradigm based on reward and punishment. God said, obey the laws I'm giving you, and if you do, your crops will grow, the rain will come, your women won't miscarry, and you'll live in peace. If you disobey these commandments, there'll be hell to pay. Your crops will rot, your women will miscarry, there'll be wars, you'll be enslaved, it will be terrible. And that was the only logic that God really provided at that point. But if you look at the book of Deuteronomy, according to the biblical narrative, this was given right before the Jews were to conquer Canaan. And they had, therefore, 40 years of experience wandering in the desert. The old generation had died off. A new generation had been born. They had time to contemplate and study the laws and to come to terms with them. So the moral code, the legal code in Deuteronomy was not only softened and made more humane, but the whole moral logic changed, where God was saying, not only will there be reward and punishment, but you should do these things because they're just and they're right and they're fair, and you wouldn't want to be treated the way you would be treated if you disobey these commandments. And so that's one example. A second example of moral progress in the Pentateuch is the elimination of the trial by ordeal that is described in the book of Numbers. There is a procedure outlined whereby a husband who suspects his wife of adultery can subject her to a trial by ordeal. And if she survives, she was innocent. And if she didn't survive, well, she was obviously guilty. That procedure is eliminated in Deuteronomy. There's no mention of it. So somewhere in the time period between the book of Numbers and the book of Deuteronomy, that whole idea was dropped. Now, if you examine rabbinic Judaism, you see the same evolution of morality. Now, the rabbinic Judaism dates from the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE to about the end of the 6th century of the Common Era, when the Babylonian Talmud was finalized. And here again, you see a tremendous amount of moral growth. In the Talmud, the book of Makot, there's a passage, a discussion, where they're discussing the issue of capital punishment. And the Talmud reports that when the Sanhedrin, the great court, was active before the Roman conquest, it would rarely impose capital punishment because the evidentiary burdens were so high. And if it was more than once every 7 years that somebody was executed, it would be considered a murderous court. Rabbi Elazar then speaks and says, well, I think if they executed even one every 70 years, it would be a murderous court that we should condemn. And then finally, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon, both great sages, say, well, look, if we were in charge of the Sanhedrin, the great court back in the day, nobody would have been executed. And then a final comment by one of the other rabbis, Rabbi Gamliel, who said, well, then you'd lose all deterrent value from punishment, which is the same kind of debate we're having today in our politics about the death penalty. So it's a very modern outlook, not a anachronistic, irrelevant one. And one other point out of many I could make about the Talmud is that it reports that the trial by ordeal that I mentioned earlier was eliminated by the great sage Simon ben Yochai. And the reason he eliminated it was that he observed that the men were also committing adultery and were also unfaithful. And so he concluded, look, if the men are up to no good, I'm not just going to punish the women. So he did away with it. So the bottom line here is God didn't give us the truth on a silver platter, but he gave us the best and surest means of getting to it. If you're interested in more on this subject, please take a look at my book, Come Now, Let Us Reason Together. Thank you.